Hi, this is Michael from Expanse VR, and in this how-to episode for Unity, I'm going to be looking at the user interface, or UI for short. Now, most new Unity developers really overlook the UI element of their games, and even in some releases of AAA titles, etc., UI can definitely be a big factor in something that can make or break a game. And I think the real reason that people overlook the UI interface in Unity is simply because at first it can be a little bit daunting. Designing for UI can be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to show you just how simple it is to actually implement the UI system into Unity, and briefly show you how you can design your user interface in a third-party app called Adobe XD. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and of course click that notification button down below to make sure you are notified whenever I post a new tutorial for you. Now, once again, I'm going to show you some great free assets that you can use on the Unity store to help prototype your game. And in fact, this one here, which is the, it's titled very simply the combo of awesome game UI packs 8, 9, and 10 by RR Studios, is a free asset pack with a ton of great sprites that you can use for your user interface. It's free. All you need to do is jump over and look for it on the Unity Asset Store. Click open in Unity once you've actually added it to your asset pack. And then once it pops up in Unity, just click import, or actually download first and then import. Sorry, I've already actually done this myself. Once that it's in, it's going to give you this folder here. I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, Sora Studios. And it's got a great amount of content, and we're going to use some of it today. Now, your UI is going to need two main components to work. One is the canvas and the other is the event system. Now, you don't need to add these in individually. All you need to do is add a UI element, and the first time you do that, it's going to add that for you. So if you click on UI, image. So as you can see, it's already brought in the canvas for us, and it's also brought the event system in for us. Now, to view your UI a lot easier, we're going to click on the 2D button up here, which is going to bring you to the 2D orthographic view. And if we zoom out now, we can see it a lot easier. Now, if you don't see the binding box, which is this box out here, just make sure you've clicked on gizmos. This lets us know the canvas area, which is this one here. So looking back in the hierarchy, let's look at the three objects that have popped up when we created the image. So obviously the first one was the image element, and simply put, this is just displaying a sprite. And if we go into the UI asset pack here in our project, and we can look at one of these, we're just going to pick something. One of the things we're going to be using is a play button, so let's just use that for the moment. And you can see immediately that it has changed. It does have a bunch of different other options that we can look in here. We can attach a material, which can be very useful if we're adding a shader. We can change the color, which is just an additive, so you can see that it just overlaps it there. And there's a few other options that we can put in. But for the most part, you're just going to leave it as is. The second one, of course, is the event system. Now, with the event system, there can only ever be one event system in your project. You don't need to know how it works at the moment. Most of it's done behind the scenes with Unity, just knowing that will handle when we do things like buttons and sliders and anything like that where you're actually interacting with the UI environment. And lastly, we have the canvas itself. And this is what we're going to cover now, as it is probably one of the more, not exactly complex, but it is something that sometimes befuddles new users to Unity. Now, you can have more than one canvas in your project, but it's usually recommended that you don't, with one exception, and we'll go into that later on, where you should actually have two canvases. But for the moment, we're just going to stick to the one. And if we have a look at the options here, there's the render mode. And for the most part, you're always going to use screen space overlay, which just means that it's always going to sit on top of your project no matter what. The other option that is quite often used is screen space camera, and we'll go into that in a different episode. The other options you don't need to worry about too much, except for the canvas scaler, which we're going to go into now. Now, at the moment, I have my project set to HD 1920 by 180. And if I quickly grab our image, and we're just going to move it to the center. Actually, one thing I did forget to cover when I was talking about images is this important button right here, the set native size. And what that will do is make sure that when you import a sprite into your project, that it's set to the size that it was intended for. So at the moment, that's its actual proper size. And then from there, we can scale it down to whatever we need. But for the moment, we're just going to leave it like that, as it's going to demonstrate what we need for with the canvas and looking at the canvas scaler. And this is something that a lot of people miss when using a UI and don't realize just how important it is to get it right. So at the moment, the canvas scaler is set to constant pixel size. And what's going to happen is here, if I now switch this over to Ultra HD, you can see that our button has actually dropped down in size. And if I go back again to HD, you can see it again. Sorry. And as I'm jumping around, you're seeing that it is changing size and it's keeping this pixels constant, which is not what we want if you want to be able to move this to different environments. Say you want to do it from a HD version, or you want to move it to a mobile phone or to an Ultra HD, you want these UI elements to stay constant. So what we do is we click over here and scale with screen size. Now this is going to look a little bit odd because once you do scale with screen size, it is going to use a reference resolution. And at the moment it's using a very small one. So if we go back to 1920 by 1280, which is where we started, now you can see that no matter what we do, as long as the aspect ratio is the same, so that's why the other one didn't work, that it is going to stay the same size, and that will affect all our UI elements. So now that we've got our play button there working no matter what size we work with, and I'm going to go back to full HD for the moment, let's now shrink it down. Now there are a couple of different ways to do this. Now if you're used to using the WERT keys for size, movement and rotation, which are your shortcut keys, using the resize one here is not the right way. Scaling it is not the best practice, because when we go to bind this to certain areas, which I'll explain in a second, it's not going to work too well. So what we actually want to use is the T shortcut, which is the rectangle tool, to do any changes to the size. Because as we shrink it down here, what you'll see is that the scale is maintained, which is what we want to do as often as possible, because this will be reflected when we do any changes to screen. So for here, we're going to have it down to, let's just say about here. And if you hold shift key, it will keep its ratio, where if I don't hold the shift key, it can go to all sorts of different shapes. So we're going to bring it down to roughly here. In fact, for this first exercise, I'm actually going to change it over. So they've got some really cool, I think it's here in the props. Yes, we're going to use this heart one instead. And same thing, you just drag it into there. Again, I'm going to scale it down. And I'm just going to move it up to the top right hand corner here. And you can see that's our little health bar. And we're going to call this life. And I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times. Actually, before I do that, let's take them away. The next part we're going to go through is here, which is our anchor points. Anchor points are going to be important when we are resizing to different screen sizes. At the moment, it is bound to the middle of the screen. And it's always good practice to bind the anchor points to where you would want them in display. So for instance here, we want it up in the top right hand corner, and you can then see these little points here that I've just pointed up, which is now anchoring this picture to here. This is when we're doing this changes, and for instance, there was one there when we changed it to the aspect ratio, where even though it may not hold the same pixel size, it's going to make sure that it's bound to the right area of the screen. So there's a good example. So it's gone to a bigger size of the image, but it still made sure it's stayed in that same spot over in the corner there. The other part of the anchor points is that you can actually set how it stretches, but we're not going to worry about that at the moment. All you need to know is that you should be using these points here, depending on where you would like it to sit in the screen. Now, if you're only going to ever be using one screen resolution for this, so say you've got a dedicated pad that you're going to be using this game for or application for, then none of this really matters that much. But for most games now, you do need to be taking into consideration that it is going to be on a variety of different resolutions. And this is just the best way to make sure that what you put up on your screen is going to be reflected on the player screen to the best ability, depending on what that resolution is. So now that I've got that one in, back to what I was saying before, we're going to have those 3 lives. Let's put one over here and another one over here. So there we go. We got our life counter. And what we're going to do here is we're actually going to let's actually come into the wrong spot. Let's move it over to the center of the 3. And we're going to move that here. And probably something I did forget to mention is that any UI elements that we create do need to be childed to the canvas. They should automatically be done that when you actually add it, but it's just very important that they always do sit in that point. So now that we've got the sort of basics of how the canvas works, what it uses for, the bounding areas, how to make sure that things scale correctly, I'm just going to add a few more elements in, and then I'm going to go over how to interact with them. Okay, so the next element we're going to throw in here, we're going to start working on the options menu. And we've had our pictures, but now we're going to add in a new one, which is our button. And button automatically comes with a text component, which we don't need, so we're going to delete that. I'm going to add an image to the image component of it. Again, set native size. Again, hit T, bring it down to be a little bit more scaled to the right size. And we're just going to move it up to here. And we're going to duplicate that, bring it down. And add our pause image to it. And that's what you can see. The great thing about what we're doing here with this little pack is that you can actually prototype so fast. We may not use this, it may look terrible, but it's going to look functional and it's going to work for what we need for the moment. And just rename this one to play button. And pause button. And I'm just going to duplicate one of these one more time and bring it up here. And where's our exit? The close. Now, the great thing about these images is that we can customize them a little bit further. Let's make it a little bit smaller, it doesn't need to be so big. But before doing that, I'm just going to add a couple more images in. And I'm going to show you a neat little trick that you can do here. I'm going to call this one shadow. And even there, we can sort of set the alpha so it blends a little bit too. Create an empty. This will be play button. Sorry, play text. Actually, you should have this roughly up here in the center. Cool. Let's duplicate that one. This one we're going to call pause text. And just bring it down here. And where we've got our image, we'll just use the pause. There. Then we have to do the same thing for the shadow before I forget. And I might line this up just ever so differently so that they are even. Cool, I'm done. So it's looking great. Another thing that you can do is with the options menu here with the image we've got there. Just again to make it a little bit more appealing. I'm just going to make it just ever so transparent. It makes our buttons pop out a little bit more and just shows that we're still a part of the scene. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is the buttons themselves and making them a little bit more interactable. We're not going to do the scripting just yet, but we are going to make sure that they function visibly. So if we push play right now, they do function. I can click on them and they gray once they are clicked on. Actually, give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to disable that effect. And turn off my mouse indicator. So going back to this again. So push play, pause. So they are quite visible, but let's just make it a little bit more so. So if we look down here, we can see all the interaction options. The main ones being the colors that they are tinted once you do any action with the button. So for the moment, we're going to change a few of these things up. We're going to change the selected color to red. Press color, we are going to make just a slightly bit darker. And the highlight color, we're just going to do here with a tinge of yellow. So let's see how that looks now. So as we come over, you can see it highlights. And I haven't changed these other ones yet. When I press it, it turns to red. Now I do this every single time. Sorry, we'll just click back to 2D view. Click F. Double click on a button. Yeah, sorry, as I was saying, I do this every time. What you should actually be doing is actually setting up the colors first on the first button and then copying to make all your other buttons. But we can get around this as well with a quick little change. So if we click here, copy component, select our other two, paste component values, they will now change over. The only problem being is this here, where it's gone the target graphic. We just need to set this back to the button it is. So target graphic here should be the exit button. Target graphic here should be the pause button. Let's just double check that that works. I might need to just click on it and drag it in for it to actually work. Oh yeah, sorry, that should be close button. Let's try that again. There we go. Yeah, so just for simplicity, just make sure that you drag it in. And now they're functioning as they should be. And the last thing we're going to do now, before we get on to scripting, now I'm just going to, on our options menu, I'm just going to disable the image so it's a little bit easier to see. But if I click on the button, you're going to see these arrows that are joining between all our buttons. And what that is if you are using another input besides the mouse, for instance, if you want to use the arrow keys on your keyboard, you can actually I need to click on one first. I can actually use the arrow keys to go between the buttons. The only problem is that they're kind of working a little bit funky because we have it in automatic mode. So if you look down here, we've got it here in automatic mode for navigation. What we want to do on all three buttons is change it from automatic to change it to none first, so get rid of all, to explicit. And what that's going to allow us to do now is determine which way the buttons go depending on what arrow you push. So for instance, our play button, if we push up, we want to go to our to the close button. So we pull close over to select on up, and now you can see that it's linked. And the same thing for the downwards way. We want to have the pause in the on down method, on down option. And again, you can see that we've now got, let me just pull this out here so you can see it easier. There, that's much easier to see. Now you can see the relations. And you can see down here, there's a little button that says visualize, so you can take them away or use them if you want. And now we go down to our pause button. We're going to pull the play button into on up. And on exit, the close button, we're going to pull the play button to on down. So now, and I should have this on Ultra HD so you guys can see properly. If we push play, now if I use the keys, down, up. But there's one small thing that's still not quite working, is that you can see when I first push play, none of them are selected, which is okay if you want it that way. But for instance, if I push the arrow keys at the moment, nothing's happening until I do it. So what we're going to do in this instance is I actually want the play to be the default button that's already selected when we open, because we are currently playing. So if we click on the event system, we then drag our play button over into the first selected option. So now if we push play, there you go, it's already highlighted, and we can go up and down through the different options, or simply just click on it if we want to. And before I forget, let's bring our options menu back. Now, it's also very important to know that the way that it works in the hierarchy is that it's a top-down system. So anything in the canvas that is lower will always be displayed on top. So as an example, if I move the play button out of the options menu and put it on top, it's going to disappear because it's now behind it. But if I return it back to where it was before, it is now displayed in front. Same thing if I move it down. It's going to go behind the pause button because the pause button is lower in the hierarchy. So just something small to be aware of as you are designing stuff. And something I did forget to do with the options menu, no, we're stuck here in the middle. Another thing I did forget to mention, as we child objects to another one, so we've got this options menu here, you can see its bounding box here. any child of that object, if we look at its anchor point, is no longer anchoring itself to somewhere in the canvas. It's actually anchoring itself to somewhere in that bounding box. So for instance, if the, let's actually click on the exit button, we want this to be always in the top right hand side relative to where it is. So if we go in here, you can see its anchor point up here now. It's a bit hard because we've got the red on the red. Let's put it, say, to the top. There we go. You can now see the anchor point there. So it's not on the canvas, which would be up here. It's up the top here. Sorry, just a small thing that I did forget to mention earlier on. So now that we've got our UI element in, we're just going to do a simple interaction here, how we show you to use the buttons in script and show you how to just quickly pause and play the game. So the first thing we need to do is jump into our scripts folder and add a new script called UI Manager. And usually what we can do is just attach it to the canvas. You can create a UI Manager object if you want. I think just attaching it to the canvas is more than adequate enough. So we're just going to add that in here. So jumping into Visual Studio now, we're just going to type out some pseudocode of what we need to do. First off, obviously, when O is pressed, we're going to open up our options menu. We then need to pause the game when we hit the pause button, play the game when we hit the play button, and close the options menu when we hit the close button. Now the first one is going to be going into our update section, and we're going to need a serialized field to store our game object for our options menu, which is what we're going to be using to open and close. We then need to get an input for the P key using get key down, and there we're going to set the options menu to active. We'll then create a close options menu function, which is what we're going to call from the button. And in that one, we're going to just set the options menu to false. So quickly testing it out. And it's not working because we actually haven't added it to our button. So then just click on the close button. And down on the right there, you can see that we have the on-click methods where you just need to click add, and then we just drag the canvas over into it, select the UI Manager and the close option function. Now we push play and it's working. So jumping back into Visual Studio, I just realized that I was actually supposed to set this to O for options. And the other problem we've noticed is that if I do forget to disable the options menu, that it's going to be left open. So just as a safeguard, in the start function, we can set it active to false. So going into the next step, which is to set up the pause game function. And here we're going to use time.timescale. And if jumping into the documentation, we can have a look at it, that when timescale is set to 1, time passes as if in real time. So as we reduce it, it will slow things down. And if we set it to 0, then the time will actually pause. So that's what we're going to do here. Time.timescale equals 0, which will pause our game. Then we just need to jump over and create our play game function, where we're going to set the timescale back to 1. So now we save and jump it back in and try it out. And once again, I forgot to assign the functions to it. So just quickly going in for both our buttons. So first our pause one, same thing, we just add a new event to the on click at our canvas. And in this one, we've got the pause game function. And in the play, same thing, add an event, drag the canvas over, select the function UI Manager, play game. So trying this all once again. Bring up the menu, and now the game's paused. So if we close it down, you can see nothing's happening. Hit play, close it down, and you can see everything is moving once again. So that's it for this week. I did promise to show a little bit of Adobe XD to show how you can actually plan out your UI interface beforehand, but I'm actually going to leave that for another episode because this one's already gone a bit longer than I expected. But that is it for this week. If you do have any questions on this video or any other ones, definitely comment below, or even better yet, check in the description. There is now a link for the new Discord server where you can ask any questions that you like regarding this video or any other C# Unity questions, and we'll help out as much as we can. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and share to help grow our beautiful Unity community. And don't forget to hit that subscribe and notification button below to make sure you get to see our next video. See you shortly.